Okay. Thank you for being here on the public announcements. We found the person who owned the blue USB key that was lost. We also found the owner of the telephone that was lost, and I found my notebook. So this is for, there's no lost item, which is quite an achievement. We have planned this session around the topic of the science policies and research policies and indicators. And as we were discussing of the program, mainly Philippe and me with the scientific committee, with Joly, with Ismaël, with Rémi, Barré, when we were organizing the plenaries, we had a fertile imagination on what could be the topics that we could talk upon in this panel. And we finally found that there was a common link to all the persons that are seated here. And this common link is Philippe Larédo. And so I would like to ask to Philippe Larédo to join us on the stage. In the middle. You are the nose. And we are not going to make Philippe uncomfortable on issues and questions, but we would like to discuss about the topics that have been those we have worked upon. And I think the persons that are gathered here are quite representative of the topics of the community, as a community here. And they have also been the topics we have worked with Philippe, all of us. So I will give the floor to begin with Luisa Henriques, who has been, I think, the first student of Philippe Larédo. Please, Luisa. This one must work. Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a great honor for me to be invited to be part of this event in honor of Philippe. Quite difficult situation, by the way. But I was very happy when I received the invitation by Rigas to come to Paris, and I was really very happy when my ambassador allowed me to come, because I need a disclaimer here. I'm research counselor from Portugal. At council level, and so everything I'm saying, it's my words. It doesn't it's not Portuguese position or council talk. Sorry, I have to do this. The other thing, when I looked to the panel, I said, wow, I'm very specific here. I'm not talking about gender bias. Huh? You can look to the panel, huh? Or the color, yes. But because I am the only PhD student of Philippe in this panel, and I think I was the formal first one, huh? Really? I'm the first one. And so I thought I could devote a little bit of my time to talk to you about my experience as PhD student of Philippe and how I see Philippe as a supervisor, as an advisor, and as a mentor. And then I start thinking, oh, I met Philippe a long time ago. It went back to the first evaluation course in Twente, where I met Philippe and Luc a long time ago. And since then, we have been working a lot, and I hope we keep on working, because we still have a lot of material to publish coming out from my thesis and from the other. So, so my short contribution is structured around two parts. First, I will talk, as I said, about Philippe as an advisor, and then a little bit about our work in policymaking for science and technology and innovation policy. So I will be the one that will talk a little bit more on European research and innovation policies. So, Philippe as advisor, that's difficult. I must confess that I was looking to the white sheet of paper and said, wow, I cannot say anything. It took me some time. So I decided, well, let's do some brainstorming alone. So I will write some keywords so I can define Philippe. So I found 7, and the 7, it's okay. It's a magical number. I like it, and I think it's enough. So, and this is just my perception. So I will start by 2 keywords. It is very challenging and very innovative. These, I think, they are very important characteristics for any supervisor, but when you look to a student like me that was not a young student, that means a lot. Because I was going to write a thesis about the Portuguese construction of the innovation system, and I was part of it. So I had a lot of preconceptions, prejudices, wrong narratives, and Philippe helped me a lot to be analytical, to be critical. And the end result, I can say that it was quite iconoclast, using the Bruno Latour word, because we had destroyed most of the traditional narratives about Portugal, about the way the perceptions on the key players, and we developed a new narrative which was imposed but with some hurdles. I had problems with my Portuguese co-supervisor, so you can understand that was not an easy thing. I'm not talking about the difficulties of listening every month. Luisa, you are not an historian. You should not pretend to be one, and that was a very good advice, and I found it in a recent paper of Philippe as well. So, in terms of, as an innovative person, I think Philippe, that derives from what I've said, is always looking for new readings of realities, always giving a new perspective on a problem, or a new unexpected entry point for the analysis. I think that's how I see it. It's very ambitious, and I think maybe we had a problem in my thesis. We didn't know what was enough for a PhD thesis from a senior student, but that was okay. And then the question of guidance, guiding you with freedom, but framing you. So by the end, I was doing and concluding the expectations from Philippe's idea on the subject. He's patient and he's caring, and I want to devote something about this, because I've seen, my thesis was at the Centre de Sociologie d'Innovation, and I've seen Philippe in a rescue type of role. And I knew that if I would be down during my training, I knew that he was going to be there for me. And that's a very kind of good feeling that you can, as a PhD student, that your supervisor will be there always for you. So I don't want to spend much time, so I would move a little bit to our work on the unlocking the OECD model for policy making, for science policies. And maybe I just want to share that this paper is derived from my fieldwork during my thesis, and it's important to understand because we try to understand Portugal and the struggles to institutionalize a science policy cycle and structures and functions, and we couldn't arrive, and we couldn't explain it. And so that's where we found the idea of looking to for the benchmark model, and we knew that OECD has been very influential, and we started from that the idea to develop our research policy article, and that was a lot of fun spending 2 months inside the archives of OECD. This paper, I think, it was an interesting one. We have identified the main functions for the policy making and as well the implementation structures. So now we know how the policy are designed by whom, which type of objectives and priorities, how the interest of actors are articulated, budget mobilized. So more or less what has been defined in the 60s are still the backbone, we can say, of the policies. But now Philippe, I think, is working more on this and is going to the shaping of the policies, analyzing the three generations of policy, more or less almost by decade, I guess. And that's is questioning, by the end, what he's doing is questioning the adequacy of the policies that we have now to the transformations of the economy and society. And I learned that there is a recent paper or communication on the emperor is naked. And yesterday we had one on death of indicators. So it's a kind that we are looking to rebirth of innovation policies and the way to measure it. So beautiful paper and talk, by the way. So my last point is just on the capacity that Philippe has to anticipate the changes. I was reading his paper from Futuris 2011, and I found that he had put there three issues that really are very much on the core of the policy debate right now in Europe. And so, like, questions are, should Europe develop a fully fledged innovation policy? The partnerships and the role that intermediary actors are playing because the Commission are delegating to them their funding responsibilities, and lately the mission-oriented that are at the core of the recommendations of Lamy report for FP9. I'm not going to elaborate in the arguments put forward by Philippe on this point, neither my opinion on that, but as we are supposed to raise some questions, I would put a kind of question on, do we need an European innovation policy? And if yes, what's going to be its European added value, and how we are going to deal with the subsidiary principle? Because innovation policy might be a kind of ERC with the mono-beneficiaries instruments, and therefore what the treaty says, which European research policy is based on cooperation, need to be elaborated on that. So, and more, innovation is not like frontier research where competition is global. So my question is, where is the rationale? What is the market failure that needs to be addressed at European level? The second point is on the need for the variety of partnerships and actors. Maybe I'm giving you fresh numbers. These partnerships are capturing 25% of H2020 budget, 14% in the industrial pillar, and 30% on the societal challenge. So there is a quite huge delegation of funding activities from the Commission to these new policy actors. So I would very much like to listen about Philippe's opinion about the need that we have at European level of these partnerships. And I'm finishing. The last point about mission-oriented, so it's a kind of evolution of the report that we both participated on the other rationals. And so if there is going to be missions, who are going to define them? How are they going to be defined? Is that deriving from foresight studies? Is that a willingness of the policymakers? And then picking up the question of the partnerships, which governance model for these missions? So I'm finishing here, and I just want to say thank you, Philippe, for everything.
Thank you, Luisa. I'll give the... He keeps everything for the end. That's also one of the characteristics of Philippe. So we'll give the floor to Rémi Barré, who is among his older colleagues.
Thank you. So I want, with emotion, with, of course, a lot of sobriety, to bear witness in a few words of a companionship which has lasted and still lasts since the 35 years since we have known each other. If I recall, in 1982, Ministry of Research recently reshaped with the new government coming in. Just to say, I want to express my gratefulness, and I think the one of many here, to what you did for our community, our scientific community over the years. And I think this conference is a good proof of that. Over the years, what is striking to me is that you have put in front the notion of the collective, the small collective of the lab and the working group, and the larger collectives at national and European and international levels. And that's, I think, a characteristic of what you have always done, and which we have all, and of which we have all benefited, and myself, of course, included. Beyond that, the notion of public service, which is maybe to some people a sort of old-fashioned word, to me, and you are here to show it, it's most noble concept, and you certainly embody that very much. Another point is that you have been, I would say, a European research area maker on the ground, on the wild, in the wild, as Ismail would say, which means in the real world. And here again, this conference shows it, and Europe, as one all know, is a word also to say that it's beyond Europe, and welcome, and more than welcome to all beyond Europe. And this is also something I would like to highlight. And of course, your contribution to the field, I won't enter into that. Highlight also the fact that, to me, the real potential and dimension of the articulation between science policy or science studies and quantitative empirical work is really what is being done in Rigas, and I highlight Rigas, of which you are the center and a creator, and having myself quite a number of years ago started OST, I see, what it can mean to make things to their real ambition and perspective. To finish with, I'd like to say that one of the key things with you are the discussions. And discussion on a professional point, and then in a few seconds, unsuspected and almost cosmic perspectives arise, transforming what began as a casual exchange into a vast intellectual and action program, so relevant and appealing that one would immediately engage in and be ready, to go ahead and just go. And I appreciate very much that, and it still works, at least with me. And I'm very happy of that. And when discussion on more personal points, in a few seconds, provide a material to write a novel. You have here original and appealing and engaging characters, unsuspected situation, incredible events, and discussions are always an adventure. And I'd like to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Let's see if the collectives, you have something to say on that. Maybe Jakob, maybe. Jakob Edler from Manchester
Yes,
University.
I'm Jakob Edler from Manchester University, exactly. And I'm very honored to be here on the stage for what I think is a wonderful purpose. And of course, we have not coordinated. We've all done our own thing, so it's more variations on a theme because, of course, we have all kinds of overlaps in what we're saying, I think. So, well, there are numerous ways in which boundaries can be pushed, intellectually and as an intellectual. And I won't talk too much about the intellectual contribution. Others will do that, maybe with more authority, I think. But I think the latter, the function, the nature of intellectualism, of what it means to be intellectual, I think it's a bit undervalued in our community. But maybe it's in the end, for the few privileged of us who really are truly intellectual in the sense I understand it, it's maybe the more important one. So I would like to discuss shortly the role of a normatively driven intellectual and of a policy educator. And I think that role can only be played if you are credible in combining core roles of what it means to be an academic. And I say all this, of course, in thinking about one particular person on the stage here. So what do I mean? First of all, of course, we contribute to our research. And in the ideal combination, we try to better understand the dynamics, the processes, developments of what we think that are important. We have the immense privilege of choosing our own problems that we're interested in, the questions we want to ask. We then focus on theoretical contributions. We help others to understand the world better, and we always focus on empirical contributions. We want to really understand what's going on, and then we try to engage in conversations about causalities and consequences of human activity. And then as teachers, we try to help young people to engage with the world in ways that prepares them for their own professional careers. Methods, concepts, knowledge, critical thinking, reflection, transferable skills, and decent attitudes, all of that we want to help build up and to support in young generation. And last but not least, we want to support them to think in a humane and enlightened way about the importance of what it is they will be doing with their careers. So it's much more than the technical skills that we want to give them. And then, of course, as members of the epistemic community, we want to contribute to stabilize our own epistemological field, to help to stabilize and institutionalize the discourse through journals, conferences, academic associations, and we seek to support, coming back to the second point, the next generation of academics, to give them opportunities and to provide options for future of the field, of the field itself. So we want to constantly work on building, rebuilding, and maybe defending our own community and linking it to other communities. So that is in a way my ideal picture of what an academic should be, but it goes beyond that, because you also want to make a difference as beyond our immediate academic community, and that is where I come to the intellectual or to the influencer. So I think there are two types of intellectuals, of influencers, and these two types I draw on Noam Chomsky. In his latest book, he distinguishes between two forms of intellectual: the technocratic and the normatively driven. The technocratic, policy-oriented intellectual, in my words, uses his or her privileged knowledge and insight and position to support the existing system and to genuinely improve the existing system, the way the existing system works. And there's the value-oriented, the normative intellectual, morally driven, who seeks to use his or her privilege to better the world fundamentally. Not so much interested in incremental policy improvements, but in the overall orientation of the system, in the ability of the system to improve itself. Now, personally, I don't think there is an either-or, and certainly not in the figure of Philippe. I do think both roles are important. I actually think you need to be a critical technocratic influencer in order to be a critical normative influencer. And you need to have this moral drive to want to make the world a better place in order to play those two roles convincingly. So my working with Philippe has shown me that it's possible to link these two roles, to play these two roles. And he has shown me, unfortunately, that not too many are fully equipped to play them the way he plays them. So just a couple of areas, and then I'm shortly finished, a couple of areas where I think that has actually happened. So Philippe has managed to influence and shift debate, and Rémi has summarized it very, very nicely. But the experimentation that we call ERA, the way to understand emerging technologies and what it means in terms of business opportunities and moral obligations, the role of the modern university in the 21st century, also in its regional context, what it means, the fate of PhD careers and what that means for educating PhDs. It was an empirical analysis and then bringing it back to his own work. And I could go on and on. So I'm not mentioning all these things because I know he has worked on them, but because I have experienced how he has shaped the debate outside academia. Now, coming back to this kind of activity here, Philippe's leading role in Prime, in EU3, in ENIT, RISES, and so on, is not least an expression of his desire to enable and to mobilize academic and non-academic actors to see things differently, to enable, that's important, and to mobilize, to explore new ways of understanding our systems and dynamics, and on that basis to design strategies and interventions. So reminding ourselves of the academic and methodological achievements of Philippe and his role as an academic enabler means at the same time for me to celebrate the normative intellectual who influences the world around him. And I think Philippe is a prototype of a technocratic in a positive sense and a normative intellectual, and I thank him for that.
Pierre-Benoît, would you add some words since we are in the construction?
Yes, it's thanks. It's a little bit like in a PhD defense committee when you say, okay, well, I have to repeat something that have been already said, but not totally, I guess. Well, I'm so lucky to have Philippe in the research lab that I'm the director now. And you know, the direction of research is, we say in France, like faire traverser l'autoroute à un troupeau de rats. So steering a herd of cats to go through the highway. And with Philippe, it's very tough, actually. So you cannot direct, obviously. You just, if you can follow, it's it's something. It's really a success. So, so I very much hope that this moment is not the moment that we have to begin to say goodbye to Philippe because of many reasons, personal but also professional ones. And so, but I'm so happy to be here. And what I will try to do in a few minutes is to talk about impact. The impact of Philippe. So in the recent years, we worked together a lot since 2010 on impact, and perhaps it's not really visible because he is very modest, but really Philippe is one of the father or mother of ASIRPA. So I will play with ASIRPA, showing how Philippe may be analyzed through the ASIRPA lens. Obviously, it's not evidence-based, so it's not a fully fledged paper. Don't try to publish. It's more impressionistic and well. The chance with Philippe is that, you know, that we have multiple Philippes, actually, really. Yeah, it's impressive. You discover things that is done you cannot imagine. And that is done, really, where he had so many, so important influence. So I will not try to reassemble Philippe. I guess that it is too difficult, and I guess that even this panel will not make the job. So I will just follow the ASIRPA framework to say a few words on the contribution of Philippe. So when we discussed, and we discussed a lot, and discussing with Philippe is always an experience. You know, it's a kind of journey, and it's full of surprises, but full of reward also. It's so important. And so Philippe helped us to work on several concepts that are key to ASIRPA. One is productive configuration. What is important for research is that you have to have productive configuration, and that they have to be stabilized. And the core of the productive configuration is the collectives. And well, in the CSE, the collective is human and non-human. So it's not only a matter of humans. It's not even, of course, invisible scientists are important, but also it is databases, it is platform, it is the tools. And Philippe did so much to construct the collective at different level. The second, in relation to productive configurations, is the role of infrastructures. And actually, Philippe, well, I guess that he is really outstanding in providing infrastructures for our community. And I guess that it is one of his main contributions. But furthermore, actually, there is the idea that a collective has to interact with knowledge pools. And to interact with knowledge pool, you also have to contribute to the construction of communities. And there also Philippe did a lot. And well, if we are here today, it is because Philippe did what he did. So the first concept is productive configuration, and on this concept, actually, if we had to give a grade, it is very high. He contributed a lot to the making of productive configuration. The second is, and it is also, well, the CSE legacy, and actually the actor network theory, to which actually Philippe contributed a lot when he was at CSE. It is impact is a matter of chain of translation. And in this chain of translation, if you look the different ways to contribute to a chain of translation, you have the making of tools, and Philippe did a lot of tools, and I won't try to make the list so robust, the tools for strategic analysis of laboratories that are used in ADEME, CEA, and so on. Philippe he invests a lot also in expertise, and actually when we were trying to define impact of research at the beginning of IFRIS and Cortex, he said we have to work on Google Scholar. Why? Because for our community, the way grey literature, expertise report may have an impact is so important that you can be limited to papers in journal. We definitively have to do that, and we did that, and it is important. And if you look at Philippe with this perspective, he's also performing a lot. Coaching, actually, my first relation with Philippe, I didn't realize at the beginning, but he coached me. He helped me a lot. Well, I was confronted to difficult challenges, and he was there. It was in the 91 where we had our first big research project on research labs, and it was a very nice project, and Philippe was there advising. And well, he doesn't say that, but there is don't limit your ambition. Well, you have to really dream big, yes. And it makes a new reality. So Philippe, as a coach, I guess he does a lot, and with a lot of generosity. And then the battle of idea is also on the battle of idea in many stages, and it does a lot for this. So actually, in the chains of translation is also really impressive. The third concept of Azirpad that he obliged us to put in the framework is generalization. The idea is that well, we don't believe anymore in the diffusion process and blah, blah, blah. But there is something we have to understand about impact is how we shift from the circle of the first users to extensive use of the novelty. And actually, it is really a key concept, and I guess that it is a research area. And my question to Philippe is, when you look at your activity and your trajectory, how do you see your contribution? How would you say, okay?
Generalization.
Yes, your mechanism of generalization. Okay, so this is really my question. So I liked, well, and I think that there are a lot of convergence with what Jakob said on the role of the intellectual, and I guess that we see with Philippe that he's always been a very equipped. The equipment of the intellectual, he goes on the journey, but with a lot of things that are very important. And I guess that he is really an engaged intellectual in the very good sense. So to this respect, actually, there is an issue of value, and I guess that we don't believe anymore. I guess all of us in axiologic neutrality, to make it with a big name. But there is still when you believe that you have to produce good knowledge, but also producing good knowledge, so to say, to produce good society, to change the world. Actually, there is an issue of value. Well, I'm confident on the values of Philippe because, well, in my experience, I would say generosity and responsibility. But I would have also an interest in hearing him about the values, not of research, but in research.
Thank you. A difficult one. Antoine, would you add on?
Yes. I'll be very concrete and simple, hopefully not too long, just testifying from a local point of view here from SCA. So first, what I wanted to say, my feeling is that I think Philippe is a gambler. So he likes to try and he's ready to lose. And he loses sometimes, but he's quite a strong winner. And I just take as an example a theme that was allocated to me to discuss around on these companies. And first we had this first project as I arrived here locally almost 10 years ago. So I came from Seville, IPTS, as a civil servant, and there I had the idea to develop a counterpart of the R&D scoreboard and investment scoreboard. And so I developed this idea at IPTS, and so they said, why not just do a note to the file? It was called like that. And I said, I think this note to the file is still there somewhere in the bin, so it means to the trash. And arriving there, this idea came, and I said, why could we not? So there are 2,000 large multinational company, and I think we know the investment, and why not identify the patterns from the outputs of this investment, one of the output, and say, yes, let's do it. So the commission was not ready to follow this idea, and he gambled. He didn't know if we will manage to do it, but it was, I think it's a gambler. And I've seen in the various projects, we have seen a few projects, and he's ready to lose, but one has to try. And so I think it's quite characteristic. But then, if he's ready to lose, he's as well very demanding. So he won't be satisfied with a business as usual solution. So, and you can't come with argument like, yes, but it's the usual way this idea, this issue is dealt with in prestigious publications. He said, yes, but it's bullshit. So let's find something better. So I think it's as well pretty challenging, and it helps us. And so we started here locally with a small group on researcher, and suddenly we grow, and we are 10 people who join, and I think we became quite a decent research group within LYSIS through this confidence and this trust he gave us. But it's demanding, so it's very positive to be demanding intellectually, but take care, because it's as well practically. So first he asked for a small office there in the corridor, and you end up with an amphitheater for 2,200 friends. So you should know that when... so it's not only on the intellectual side that it can be demanding. But he's demanding towards other, but as well towards himself. And it's really impressive. So we worked with him and how much he achieved. So we mentioned this network of excellence he has driven. We have this RISIS, this infrastructure is as well leading, and locally in the French landscape, he managed as well to produce interesting project. And I really like a nickname Catherine Paradise said once. He was absent, so, but I guess he's aware of that. She called him very nicely Obelix. Because, you know, everybody will think it's impossible to do that, but he does it. Just to come back content-wise, so I mentioned this corporate invention board, so we develop here locally and within RISIS, and that makes our effort and endeavor larger than what we could do alone. And I think this interest that Philippe has in company is quite interesting, because I think it comes from his training, since his initial training, so he's aware of the role of company. And what is quite interesting in this landscape of researcher is he doesn't believe market is alpha and omega. So there is no worship of market, but clearly the companies play a big role even in knowledge production. So we know that's half of the technology production, but we are currently exploring with CWTS the scientific production of companies, and we see that's as well important. And so for those people interested more in public policies or in universities, so this focus and this support for studying companies, I think it's interesting. And without demonizing the companies, so we clearly know that they have some profit-driven strategies, and they can be a major actor in agnotology, as you mentioned. But still, let's study this world and keeping a balanced view of just what is there. And just as a last words, that's where we are currently. So we try to design and to this new world, in this new world of indicator and the positioning indicators we have in mind, but are still struggling to design and produce. And so we mentioned in a presentation there the challenge we face, and thanks to such a presentation we have contact. And hi Cynthia, thanks a lot. So I hope through this conference we'll manage to go one step further, and that's as well what was made possible through this wide network of Philippe that Philippe managed to assemble and federating, and which makes first, in the first place, research more efficient, and as well give more fun. Okay, so I will just conclude in a nutshell, and thanking Philippe for the work we still have to do. Huh? So I'm like Pierre-Benoît, so please stay there for some time again. And so thanking Philippe and all of you to be there as part of the wide network that Philippe managed to assemble around this formidable energy. So that's it.
Thank you, Antoine. Just before I give the mic to Luc, let me say that Pierre-Benoît just stole all the words I was going to say about the generosity of Philippe, about coaching me, because I met Philippe in 1989. I had a money problem. So I went to the CSE, I asked Michel Calon, do you have a job for me? He said, we just hired somebody who needs someone. So go to the third floor. So I went to the third floor and there was Philippe. And he told me, yeah, I'm going to do something for the new agency on the environment. We have to design the research program of the agency. Can you do that? I said, no, I don't even know what you are talking about. What's the environment? What's the agency? What are you talking about? Then, okay, so I hire you. So since you don't know it, you can do it. And he never used me as an employee, but as his partner. And this is an extremely important aspect of his life. We managed together a student who finished a difficult thesis, a lady from Niger who had a lot of difficulties because she was not a social scientist in finishing a study on research system in Niger. And this experience of 3 years of battle with concepts, with preparing someone, Philippe has an extraordinary energy. He passes this energy, sometimes violently, because when you put your fingers in the electricity, it hurts, and it's like a shock, and it works. It works. You have a thesis at the end. You have a thesis on someone who's very proud of having done it. And I'm very proud of having worked with Philippe, and I'm very proud he coached me, and he accepted to be my coach all my life. Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you, Rigas. I'm going to disobey your instructions in two ways. First of all, I don't have any exam questions. Okay. And secondly, I think the whole purpose is to embarrass Philippe. So anyway, let me begin with a bit of personal history. Philippe and I met in the late 1980s. I think it was in Amsterdam in a small meeting on evaluation organized by the late John Simon. Surrounded by very ethereal sociological concepts, we had an immediate connection as people grounded in practice, and in the background also a shared interest in marine technology, which is a surprising thing maybe. So our first major project together was a large-scale international evaluation of the Eureka initiative in 1992, 14 countries involved, and it was possibly the only fully resourced evaluation I've ever been in, a whole population survey, interviewing everybody, and it ended up with a dinner in the Hall of Battles at Versailles, presided over by President Mitterrand. So it's been downhill all the way since then, unfortunately. But more importantly, though, within this evaluation, Philippe was a key player in developing a questionnaire which has been the prototype for almost all European evaluations since. We see the same questions again and again, but they were once designed. The key conclusions from this also remain valid today. For example, the significance of vertical versus horizontal collaborations, the need for projects to align with firm strategies, and the market naivety of many SMEs. So this could easily be a story all about evaluation, but Pierre-Benoît has also already spoken of this. I did want to highlight one other thing we did together, which was to make a joint state-of-the-art for an OECD conference in Berlin, which eventually emerged as a chapter of the 2006 OECD Science and Technology in an Industry Outlook. In my view, it still speaks to this conference. We had observed a fourfold turning point in the environment for evaluation at that point. The new emergence of competitive pressures, such as international ratings and rankings, increased focus on the interfaces between disciplines and between research, the economy, and society, more public governance and more contractualization, and for our field itself, a technical maturity, which meant that there was, at last, a political acceptance of evaluation as an activity. So the report, I say the report, this was very much Philippe, distinguished between the evaluation of research institutes and groups, programs and procedures. This was a very typical Philippe insight. Something everyone else assumed was the same, he observed were different. So a procedure means, in this case, that the initiative supports all the actors who meet particular criteria. For example, a fiscal incentive for R&D, very different from a program defined by goals. And lastly, research systems. He also highlighted issues which are still unresolved today, such as the relationship between indicators, benchmarking, and evaluations. So the second theme I wanted to talk about comes because, as some people here will know, Philippe for many years has stayed in my house when he's fulfilling his duties as a Manchester professor. We spend many hours in car journeys discussing many things. I mean, in fact, if Jimmy Wales had known Philippe, he wouldn't have bothered to invent Wikipedia, I have to say. But mostly we talk about university policy and management issues, something I find hugely helpful. These are not just conversations, though. Philippe's views are underpinned by an important academic contribution. For example, his paper in Higher Education Policy in 2007, which took apart the concept of the third mission of universities and demonstrated a particular skill of Philippe, I think, this ability to cut through and reformulate the taxonomies of our field. In this case, he proposed that we move from the idea of the three missions instead to one of three functions: mass tertiary education, professional specialized higher education and research, and academic training, and then bring those together as components to understand the missions. Most recently, we've worked together, again with Philippe very much the driving force, on the topic of university internationalization. And I just heard on Tuesday from the head of the European Universities Association, she said, "Oh, your colleague Philippe Larédo has really shaken things up for us." I said, "Oh, what's he talked about?" Internationalization. So there we are, impact straight away. I would like to conclude by mentioning a different kind of contribution that's already been alluded to today, the one of building the communities that study science, technology, and innovation. This is not one community, it's several overlapping ones, including STS, scientometrics and indicators here, science policy studies, and economics of innovation. But whichever one you choose, Philippe is always a significant figure in them. Moreover, as again has already been pointed out, he's worked tirelessly to build the institutional frameworks that have allowed our discipline to mature and opened the pathway for generations of young researchers. Some of these frameworks are names for the past, the Prime Network of Excellence. Some are very current, EU SPRI and RISIS. But if you go to the origins of the core, you always find Philippe driving them along. It's not only a matter of personal commitment, but also a clear demonstration how he's turned around on itself the insights and tools our field provided and used that knowledge for the benefit of our field. So thank you, Philippe.
Would you want to have some words?
First, I'll say something that you might not believe. I didn't know anything. So I just discovered it because yesterday there was Luisa who was there, who was not supposed to be there, and then suddenly in the evening dinner where you were, there was Luke and Jakob, and then I understood that there was something happening, cooking. Okay.
So you didn't do all the program of the conference.
No,
He skipped that part.
yeah. Okay, so that's the first small thing I wanted to say. Then there are two. Then you never know how to answer to anything. Okay? But there are a few things I would like to say. I was not born to be a researcher. There's no way. This one person who changed my life, Michel Canon. Yeah. We worked because we had to address an issue that was being asked by the policy side. So I went on the policy side. I was a bureaucrat at that time. And Rigas was the scholar, the small hand of Michel for doing this job. Right? And then at the end, Michel told to me, but you're not made for being a politician, and even less for being a policymaker. You have a PhD, come back to research. And that's how I came back. So you can make a career with a first article published at over 40 years of age. Okay? And I think it's very important for everybody. There's not one way to make a career. But when you do a career, there are things that remain on all of your life. With Michel Calon, we had a program where we wanted to build the next generation of relational indicators. And we could not have the computing power, so we stopped the program. Right. And if we were doing it, it's because before had been a computer guy working on modeling. Okay, that's my overlife. And that program is something we have started again here in Marne, because having the computing power, we could start again with it, and we could address issues that we've been asking ourselves for 20 years. So when you become old, you tend to come back to things that you have not been able to do before and that are still remaining in the back of your mind. So it's part of my Resist engagement, part of what we do to build a new space for articulating quantitative and qualitative, is also linked to the fact that 20 years ago, it was impossible to do. So I owe a lot to Michel. And I owe to Michel the fact that Luisa was my first student. There are two things I would like to say. You never decide to do things. You are pushed in doing things. So we did Prime as a collective endeavor, but nobody tells that one day there's 4 guys around the table, Ben Martin, Harry Rip, Frieder Meyer-Kramer, and this guy next to me, who said, we need to take advantage of this new network of excellence. And none of us can do it because the big labs cannot coordinate the effort. So you should do it. And I remember Harry saying, you are, and that was at that time, you will be 59 or 60 when it finishes, so it will be retirement time. So you need to do, you need to spend your time for a collective effort. And that's how it was born. And I think this is what it is to be part of a collective, and what it is to participate to things. So here, as an STI community, you cannot speak about the community without speaking about Ton Van Rijn and the efforts he did, Paul, who complemented it. This is very, very important. Or Benedetto, who was a young scholar at that time, who thought that indicators should not be only centrometric indicators. Okay? There's nothing done by one person. That doesn't exist. It's always a collective, and it's always a progressive thing. One of the things I learned, and it's very important for you, because when we are in academic, we tend to stick to our views, is that sometimes you have to take your views back and say, what is next here is far more interesting. And I should open, and I even should reorient. And I think it is a very important dimension of being an academic. This guy next to me being a very good example. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. There are many stories that I could tell. I mean, one story I still keep in mind, because I think it changed many things, is we are doing, with Luke, we are doing an evaluation of the Art and Humanity Council in Canada. And we went out as stupid guys who don't understand what it is that a next storm is going to come out. We went out what was it? In Quebec, yeah. So we went out, and we ended in a storm which were minus 35 everywhere, and the only way we could move was to move from one shop to other every 15 meters to go back to the hotel, okay, 2 hours or 3 hours. that are stories of the type of things you do. The thing I learned this time, at that time, which I've kept all the time, and which I still think is important for many people, is that bureaucrats, technocrats, and politicians are not the same. And in a democracy, people who change things are politicians, those who are the elected representatives. And technocrats very often end up being the conservative people who think that this is the only way to do things. And when you work with them, you just foreclose the possibility of new allies. I live in France, like I said bluntly. I stopped working with the administration about 7 years ago. But I work a lot with politicians. And I all advise you to think that the two are not the same, and that the community is a very bad term, which they call policymaker. Okay? There's no such thing as a policymaker. So whom you work with will define the type of work you do, the type of position you take, and the type of thoughts that you will have, or questions that will be raised to you, and direction where you will go. And I think it is very important for us when we build indicators, or when we think about new indicators. Indicators in the wild that Ishmael spoke about, I don't believe into them. What I believe into is indicators with communities, in communities. And the bureaucracy is one type of community like over. The heads of universities, where now Luke is part of, is another type of community. But when you work with regional elected representatives, they do ask you questions about universities that are radically different than the questions you get from the government at the national level, or even more at the European level. So I really think that for us as building indicators, there's no way you can build an indicator that serves everybody, that is understood or that is used the same way, that is discussed under in similar ways. I mean, think about the 3% GDP issue. You know, it took us 10 years to make our politicians understand in France it was stupid, and then it was regenerated by the European Commission under the Lisbon process. So you just discover that it's an endless process, and the communities are not the same. They are fragmented. We discussed that this morning with altmetrics. So I think that this is very important. You never built an indicator in the wild. You built an indicator in a community, with a community. And when you have no community, you build an indicator for yourself, so mostly reflecting what you are in an academic, in an internalist view of what science is in society. So I think it's, for us as a community, for you all, I think it's very important. And I was asked what I was, let's say, the most proud of, or what is my generalization process, is all the people who are under 35 here. Okay, I don't think this is anything more important, that things are taken up, transformed, discussed, argued, that we are considered as old bunch of guys that, you know, and many guys, unfortunately, that are from the past, and that new things should be done. I really think this is what I'm most proud of, is that when I started the first meetings, the average age in EU3 was over 45. Last year we did an evaluation, approximate, and it was just under 35. Here we could make an example. We could make a test, and even though I'm there, or Peter is there, or Paul is there, the average age is quite young. So I think this is what I'm the most proud of anything else I've been doing. Now there's the last thing I just wanted to say is about what is going to happen. I think that the issues about the future of Europe are very important. not simply FP9. You know, we'll get through Brexit. I think it's a very, very important. For me, it's more important than anything that deals with the FP9, for example. Right. Do we remain as a community in Europe, or do we fragment? You know, will we find an agreement so that at least UK is like Switzerland or Norway for us, same partners in knowledge production? But it's not only UK. Poland is going to be the next one. Right? So we face really very strong issues. And we had I was invited for the 50 years of the Swiss Research Council. So I had to make the speech. And I really questioned the academics about the vote about immigration that took place. And that was a very interesting answer. Most of them said, okay, we recognize we are stupid not to participate, but half of us are not Swiss. And I said, you live in Switzerland. So why did not you engage in that debate? Why did you push yourself as being elements that make the richness of this country? I think the same question should be asked to academics in the UK, myself being part-time, one of these. So I really think we are citizens. We are privileged citizens, and we don't engage enough. Doesn't mean we know the truth, but we don't engage. We just step aside. And I think it's part of our responsibility to engage for the future of Europe. And we've invested, I mean, probably here the older one, have invested all their life in pushing for the EC. My only campaign and political campaigns have been to support decisions around the European Union in France. And I really think this is a critical issue for us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. There is maybe someone who wants to add, but I think it's better that we leave it here. We close the conference. I have a public announcement about the issue of posters. I said yesterday that we will have a competition on posters, and so I created a committee that has 12 members, which Gemma Derrick, Sabrina Peterson, Soizik Messiaen, Fatima Sati, Florian Berg, Vanessa Meri, Thomas Franzen, Hélène Dro, Jakob Tesch, Heidi Brzeski, Sibyl Hinze, and Thomas Szydlowski. Practically more women than men. So this is a committee that was gender unbalanced on the other side. And there is one poster that really got more votes, really much more votes. It's the one that is called by Marianne Noël and Frédéric Bourdignon, called The Pitfalls of Signature, Questioning Affiliation in French Research and Higher Education Institutions. I didn't provoke this vote. I didn't vote. And the second one was German Richard Heidler, William Dinkel, and Anke Reinhardt on broadening the reviewable pool of the German research foundations, drivers, effects, and perspectives. And both won a free registration for next year's EU SPRI conference.